There is a word that echoes across the ages, a word written long before modern empires ever rose, long before missiles flew over desert skies, long before news agencies broadcast chaos in high definition. That word is Damascus, and it is not a word whispered from conspiracy or imagined from fantasy. No, it's found in the scrolls of the prophets, inscribed in the book of Isaiah, chapter 17. And the question that demands to be asked in this moment is this: is Damascus about to be destroyed? Isaiah 17 begins with words that are chilling, not because they were penned yesterday, but because they were written thousands of years ago, and yet sound like headlines ripped from today's news feed. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. Think of that! Damascus, the crown jewel of Syria, the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world, with history stretching back to the time of Abraham, prophesied to become a heap of ruins. The implication is total devastation, so complete, so final, that what once was a city of power and culture becomes unrecognizable. Why would such a word matter now? Why would a prophecy written in ancient Hebrew, in an age of kings and prophets, carry any weight in our modern world of satellites and social media? Because it is being echoed again, because the same region that once saw the footsteps of prophets is now witnessing the march of missiles, civil war, and the boiling pot of international conflict. What was spoken by Isaiah is not a poetic exaggeration. It's a warning, a trumpet blown into the chaos of our time. The prophecy doesn't stop with Damascus alone. It connects the fall of a city with the shaking of nations. The entire chapter speaks of Israel, of Ephraim, of Jacob growing thin and weak, of men turning to the work of their hands. And yet it all begins with Damascus. It all begins with a city that represents more than just land or government. It represents rebellion, pride, resistance against the purposes of God. So when Isaiah speaks of its fall, he is not merely forecasting a physical collapse, he is unveiling a spiritual pattern. God removes the strength of the proud, he humbles the high places, he allows the shaking not because he hates the nations, but because he longs to awaken them. Damascus is not just a location on a map, it's a mirror that reflects the pride of humanity, the systems we've built without God, the alliances formed in defiance of his ways. And when judgment comes, it doesn't come as a random act. It comes as a reckoning. And the question must be asked not just of Damascus, not just of Syria, but of every nation, of every person. Are we building what will stand, or are we building what will fall? But what about now? What about the headlines? What about the recent strikes, the escalation, the involvement of superpowers in a region soaked with prophecy? It's easy to dismiss these things as politics, as war games. But to those who understand the prophetic word, it's something far deeper. The ancient prophecies are converging with the modern world. What was once seen as metaphor is now being replayed as reality. And the world is watching, not knowing that they're watching a fulfillment. Yet there is another layer to this. If Damascus is on the edge, if prophecy is unfolding before our eyes, what does that mean for us, for you? For the body of believers, it means the time is urgent. It means we can no longer afford to sleep while the world burns. It means that if the signs are appearing in the east, then the call to awaken is global. We are not bystanders in this unfolding drama. We are participants, called not to fear but to discern, called not to panic but to prepare. And if God's word concerning Damascus is true, and it is, then so is every other word he has spoken. Every promise, every warning, every call to repent, return, and be ready. This is not about doom, it's about destiny. It's not about destruction, it's about decision. For every city that falls, there must be a people that rise. For every shaking, there is a remnant being refined. So when you hear of Damascus, when you see the smoke in the distance, don't just look outward, look inward. Ask yourself what in your own life is built like Damascus, what stands in pride, what resists God's hand, what needs to be surrendered before it is shattered. Because the prophecy is not just about a city, it's about every heart that must choose between ruin and redemption. The clock is ticking, the signs are appearing, and the word is being fulfilled whether we're ready or not. And so, as the ancient words of Isaiah echo through the turbulence of our time, something becomes clear. This is not just about one city falling or one nation trembling. It's about a greater shaking, a shaking that moves beyond borders and headlines, a shaking that reaches to the very soul of a generation. Damascus may be in focus, but what's happening is part of something much larger, the shaking of nations and the awakening of hearts. We're watching a world that is unsteady. Alliances that once seemed unbreakable are now fragile. Nations that once stood tall are now trembling. Economies are faltering. Ideologies are colliding, and the pillars of society are cracking. But none of this is happening by accident. When God shakes the nations, He does it with purpose. He does it to wake up those who have fallen asleep. He does it to call back hearts that have wandered. The shaking is a megaphone, a trumpet in the midst of the noise. And the question is, are we listening? You see, God doesn't shake what's already broken. He shakes what still thinks it's standing. He shakes the high towers. He shakes the strongholds. He shakes what man has built in pride, in defiance, in arrogance. And the shaking begins where the resistance is greatest. That's why we see it in Damascus. That's why we see it in the nations. That's why we see it in our own lives. But this shaking is not the end. It's the beginning, because the purpose of shaking is not to destroy, it's to awaken. When the ground moves beneath your feet, you realize you're not in control. When the systems you trusted collapse, you begin to search for what is unshakable. And in that moment of fear, of uncertainty, of collapse, there's an opportunity, an invitation to return. In Isaiah's prophecy, after the fall of Damascus and the weakening of Ephraim, something profound happens. The people begin to remember the Holy One of Israel. They begin to turn back. Why? Because the shaking removed the illusion. Because the shaking stripped away the idols. Because the shaking made them see what they had forgotten, that the only true safety, the only true peace, the only true strength is in God. And that's exactly what God is doing now. Across the earth, people are feeling the tremors. They're watching systems fall apart. They're feeling anxiety they can't explain. Depression is rising. Suicide is climbing. Fear is flooding the hearts of even the strongest. But it's not just psychological, it's spiritual. The shaking of the world is revealing the state of the soul. And God is saying, wake up. This is not the time to harden your heart. This is not the time to dig deeper into the things that are falling apart. This is the time to lift your eyes. This is the time to stop chasing the gods of this world. Stop relying on the idols of success, the comforts of materialism, the illusions of control. Because all of that is being shaken, and only one thing will remain the rock. When the shaking begins, you have a choice. You can either panic or you can prepare. You can either fall with the world or rise with the Word. God is not asking for perfect people. He's looking for awakened people. People who see the signs, who hear the warning, who feel the tremble and respond, not with fear, but with faith. The shaking also reveals what's inside us. It doesn't just test nations, it tests hearts. When the world shakes, so do we. Old emotions rise to the surface. Hidden fears begin to speak. Bitterness we buried years ago tries to come back. That's not the enemy winning, that's God revealing, because He loves us too much to let us keep hiding what's broken. He wants to heal what we've ignored, and he often allows the shaking to do what comfort never could bring: transformation. So don't despise the shaking, don't curse the storm, don't run from the tremble. Let it drive you to your knees. Let it cleanse your heart. Let it remind you that kingdoms rise and fall, but the King remains. Let it awaken you, not just to prophecy, but to purpose. And maybe, just maybe, all of this Damascus, the headlines, the fear, the uncertainty, is God's way of preparing his people for something greater, something deeper, a harvest, a return, a revival. But there can be no revival without shaking. There can be no return without awakening. The question is not whether the world is being shaken. The question is whether we're ready to be awakened. The time is now, and as the nations tremble and the world shakes, it isn't just the earth beneath our feet that's moving. It's something deeper, something quieter, but just as powerful: the shaking within us, the fear that creeps in when the familiar begins to vanish, the heaviness in your chest when you watch the news and wonder what's next, the anxiety you can't explain, the pressure that builds in the silence, the thoughts that come in the night. What if everything falls apart? What if I'm not strong enough? What if I fail? These aren't just emotional reactions. They are spiritual battles. And if you don't understand that, you'll keep trying to fight them with the wrong weapons. You'll keep trying to talk yourself into peace, medicate your way out of fear, or bury your emotions under distractions and noise. But none of those things can win a war that begins in the spirit, because fear is not just a feeling, it's a weapon. A weapon designed to paralyze your faith, steal your vision, and silence your calling. But here's the truth. God never intended you to live ruled by fear. He never created you to be overwhelmed by sorrow, to be bound by anxiety, or to be a prisoner of your past. The same God who shakes the nations can also break the strongholds within you. But to overcome the negative, we have to recognize what it is and where it comes from. The enemy knows how to manipulate the atmosphere. He knows how to use the shaking around us to trigger the shaking inside of us. Because if he can keep you distracted by fear, he can keep you from walking in faith. But the Word of God is clear. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. So if fear is not from him, then it's from somewhere else. And if it's from somewhere else, you don't have to accept it. You don't have to carry it. You don't have to be defined by it. That means no matter what's falling around you, you can stand. No matter what voices are speaking panic, you can walk in peace. Because the peace of God is not dependent on circumstances. It's born in the presence of God Himself. But here's the challenge. Peace doesn't just come by accident. You don't stumble into joy. You don't drift into faith. You choose it, you pursue it, you fight for it, not with fists or anger, but with truth, with worship. With the Word, that's how you overcome. When fear rises, you don't run. You lift your hands. When anxiety presses in, you don't collapse. You speak the promises of God out loud. Because worship is a weapon. Truth is a sword, and when you wield them, the enemy flees. Some of you have been carrying the weight of fear for years. You've learned how to function in it, even minister in it. You've masked it with confidence or buried it under busyness. But it's still there, and God is saying, I don't want you to carry it anymore. This shaking isn't meant to destroy you. It's meant to set you free. Free from the cycle of depression, free from the torment of anxious thoughts, free from the shadows that have followed you since childhood. You were not born to survive in fear. You were born to overcome it, but overcoming doesn't mean you never feel afraid. It means fear doesn't control you. It means that when you feel it, you still obey God anyway. You still speak life. You still stand. You still move forward. That's courage. That's victory. That's faith. And listen, faith isn't just for mountaintops. It's for the valleys. It's for the trenches. It's for when you don't feel strong, because that's when it matters most. That's when it shines brightest. That's when it defeats the darkness. And here's the mystery. When you choose faith in the shaking, you don't just overcome the fear. You become the one who carries light in the darkness. You become the testimony others need to see. You become a voice that breaks the silence. You become a living sign that God is real, that He still delivers, that He still gives peace that passes understanding. This is what the world needs now, not more panic, not more opinions. It needs people who know how to stand when others fall. People who carry peace when the world is screaming. People who have been through the storm and still lift their hands in worship, because that kind of faith changes atmospheres. That kind of faith moves mountains. That kind of faith breaks the power of fear. And maybe that's why the shaking had to come, so the fear would rise, yes, but also so you could finally face it. And not just face it, defeat it, because on the other side of fear is freedom, and that freedom isn't just for you. It's for the ones who will be set free because you refused to be bound. You were not created to live in fear. You were created to overcome. And in the midst of all this, the shaking of nations, the trembling of hearts, the falling of cities like Damascus, the unraveling of systems, and the rising of fear, there remains something else. Something quiet but unshakable, something hidden yet powerful, a thread of hope that runs through the chaos. A promise woven into the fabric of judgment, because even in the shaking, God never leaves Himself without a witness. Even in destruction, there is always a remnant. Yes, Isaiah spoke of judgment. He spoke of cities crumbling and nations fading. But he also spoke of a people who would not be swept away, a people who would not be broken by what broke others. He said they would turn back to the Holy One of Israel. They would not trust in what their hands had made. They would not find shelter in the shadows of idols. No, they would return, and that word, return, it's not just a command. It's an invitation to come back to the place of safety, not physical safety, not the illusion of control, but the true place of refuge, the place where you are covered even when the sky is falling, the place where you are hidden even when the storm rages. The remnant lives in that place. You see, God always preserves a remnant in every age, in every collapse. In every judgment, there's always a people who remain, not because they are stronger, not because they are better, but because they chose to return when others ran, because they chose to stand when others bowed, because they chose to listen when others mocked. The remnant is not about numbers. It's never been about crowds. It's about hearts. It's about devotion. It's about those who can look at a collapsing world and still say, I will not be moved. Those who hear the sound of war and still choose peace. Those who see the fire and still walk in faith. That is the remnant, and in this hour, God is calling for that people to rise again. You may say, but I'm not perfect. That's the point. The remnant isn't made of perfect people, it's made of surrendered people. People who know they need grace, people who know they don't have the strength on their own, people who cry out for mercy and receive power. The remnant is made of the broken who refuse to stay broken, the ones who were shaken but refused to fall. And maybe that's why the storm has hit your life. Maybe that's why everything you depended on is crumbling. Maybe that's why God allowed the shaking to reach even your private world, not to destroy you, but to strip away the things that were never going to last anyway, to show you that there's only one rock that cannot be moved, to bring you into the place of the remnant. Because the truth is, the remnant is not just who survives the shaking, it's who responds to it, it's who answers the call. It's who gets down on their knees and says, Here I am, Lord, use me. And God will. He'll take the ones who were counted out and raise them up as voices. He'll take the quiet, hidden, faithful ones and put His fire in them. He'll raise up those who the world has forgotten and turn them into signs for a generation. The remnant is rising now, quietly, without applause, without the spotlight. They're turning off the noise. They're coming back to the Word. They're humbling themselves in prayer. They're repenting for the idols they once served. And they are saying, God, whatever you want to do, do it in me. And it's through the remnant that hope begins to break through. Not hope based on headlines or treaties or elections, no real hope, hope that's anchored in eternity. Hope that shines even in judgment, hope that says, even if Damascus falls, even if the nations rage, I know in whom I have believed. That's the paradox of it all. The world is falling apart, and yet something stronger is being built at the same time, something invisible to the world's systems. Something eternal, that's the work of God in the remnant. He uses the shaking to tear down what was never meant to stand, and through it, He calls forth a people who are ready to carry His glory into the storm. If you're listening now and your heart is burning, if something inside you is awakening, that's the call. That's the invitation to become more than a spectator, to rise up as part of that remnant, to step into the fire and come out refined, to live not for survival but for purpose, not for comfort but for the kingdom, because when everything that can be shaken is shaken, what remains is what was always meant to remain. And the remnant, they remain,